Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Over the Horizon, a Bitcoin podcast. Today I'm here with Caleb Cross, founder of Apex Bitcoin. Caleb, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks, Joe. I hope you're doing well. Lots of exciting news this morning, your afternoon, with Bitcoin reaching its all-time high. And gosh, it jumped up very fast. I didn't actually expect it to spring up that fast. So yeah, I've been looking at the charts for the last sort of 24 hours, and I'm excited to see what happens over the next few months.
It's pretty incredible. Yeah, morning for you, afternoon for me. Bitcoin went from 113.7 to 116.7 in actually 3 minutes. It took it 3 minutes to do that. I was eating dinner and I thought Bitcoin was done for the day. And I look at my phone. Oh my gosh. I throw down my fork. I have to do some tweeting. But it's crazy. Crazy times. It looks like we're going to be in for a great summer for Bitcoin. So perfect time to do this show. We're going to talk about everything today. We're going to talk about what Apex is, the Bitcoin environment, any way you want to take this, any question. That's the idea of the show. We talk about what's happening in Bitcoin and what's coming next, and we talk with founders and what they're building. And so this is fantastic. I want to kick things off with your story, right? Can you share the story of how you first got involved with Bitcoin and what led you to become an entrepreneur in this space?
Sure. So it's a very interesting story. Back in 2019, we had COVID. So that was really early 2020. And New Zealand had one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. And, when you're told to stay home and you can't do anything, first of all, you have a lot of time on your hands. And secondly, it doesn't quite feel right. If you're a free-thinking individual, straight away that that's okay, that's the rules, but something's not right. So first of all, I had a lot of time on my hands and I started on Twitter and, I followed the likes of Saifedean, I followed the likes of your Jeff Booths, and the content that they were posting really resonated with me, especially because of, the time we were going through with COVID. And a lot of them were saying this wouldn't have happened if we were on a Bitcoin standard. And that really sparked my interest. So I went right down the rabbit hole, ended up purchasing some Bitcoin, left it on crypto.com, had no idea about self-custody or collaborative custody or anything along those lines. And yeah, I held it for, the better part of 12 months. And then, as we were approaching November in 2020, Bitcoin had a big price rise. I think it went from something like 35,000 to 55,000. And to me, I'd never seen an asset move that fast. So, that kind of shocked me. And this is when I started studying things like, self-custody and, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. So again, I then started my own self-custody wallet, held my own keys, but it was just tough. It was just tough to hold your own keys, hardware wallets all over the show. I thought there has to be a way, that makes it a lot easier than this. Because for someone like myself, who I consider myself to be quite tech savvy, how difficult is this for my grandma? Or how difficult is this for, someone that doesn't have that tech savviness that I consider myself to have? So quite quickly, I pulled up a Word document and I started drafting, how do I think I could make this easier, with the limited knowledge I had at the time. So the concept for Apex was born back in 2021, 2022. However, I was quite busy with other business activities at the time, coming from a commodities trading background. And New Zealand's very strong in commodities, beef, lamb, your Manuka honeys, your bottled waters, your dairy, and, your dairy milk powders. So that was my background at the time. Over the past 2 years, Word doc grew slowly but surely. And eventually earlier this year, the concept became quite clear. And I decided I really needed to take the leap with this. When I was researching how are we going to do this and what infrastructure are we going to use and how's this all going to work, I came across Thea. And what Thea has built is exactly what I envisioned Apex as being. So we decided to partner with Thea. It's extremely clean, extremely feature rich, very forward thinking. And that's exactly, the type of partner that we need here at Apex. So yeah, we decided to partner with Thea and build with the current systems that Thea has, a collaborative custody Bitcoin vault. So yeah, what Thea's built is absolutely amazing. And, I'm glad to be speaking to you today about it, Joe.
And honest to goodness, Caleb, that's probably one of the first times that I've heard someone so far across the world who shares the exact same coming to Bitcoin story as me. I was in the same exact position. It was COVID. I was kicked out of school during spring break. They didn't allow us to come back because COVID hit right during spring break. And so as a result of that, I got kind of, do you guys say miffed? Do you guys say miffed in Australia and New Zealand, or is that just a British thing?
We were, that one starts with P and sounds quite similar. We were, yes, very miffed as well.
Right, right. No, it was, I was in the exact same situation. So I got jaded kind of toward higher authorities and power structures, and it led me to Bitcoin. So it seems like a lot of the builders today that are coming up, right, that are generally younger in the space, right, 20s and 30s, that was their orange pill moment. So that's awesome to hear. So I want to dive into a little bit more about collaborative custody. We spoke a little bit off air. Well, we had some technical difficulties trying to get the show live. We spoke a little bit off air about collaborative custody and some of these huge cohorts of people who are holding Bitcoin on exchanges right now, and they don't necessarily know what self-custody is. What is self-custody versus holding your Bitcoin on an exchange? And then obviously, I know all about it, but for our viewers, can you explain collaborative custody as well and what the utility of that is, and why did you decide to go that route with Apex?
Sure, we'll cover all three. So first of all, to us here at Apex, holding your Bitcoin on an exchange is a massive liability. This is exactly the thing that Bitcoin is trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid things like rehypothecation, which happens, when you hold your Bitcoin on an exchange and you leave it on, one of the world's biggest exchanges, there's no guarantee that they actually went and purchased that Bitcoin from the market. It might just be numbers on a screen. Then you go to withdraw that Bitcoin. They have to quickly go and buy it. What if they don't have the funds to go and buy it? What if they lent your Bitcoin out 10 times over? Not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Let's touch on self-custody. So self-custody is where you hold your own keys, okay? And this gives you a lot of power. This gives you a lot of control, but it's also quite difficult, right? If you lose your keys, you can quite often lose your life savings. And this is not a sustainable system where, a grandma holds 2 or 3 of her own keys in a multi-sig wallet. It's just not sustainable long-term, in my opinion, for 80 or 90% of the global population. So we built something called collaborative custody, which is where the client holds the key themselves, where Apex holds a key, and Thea holds a key. So if the client loses their key, Thea and Apex can only under very strict recovery conditions collaborate to re-enable access for the client. And it's not just that as well, it's actually having that support system in place for if that happens. You don't want to be running around like a headless chicken, if it does happen. You actually need to know straight away what the processes are and have that safety net in place. And my view at Apex is that the people who have that safety net in place don't actually make mistakes in the first place. Nervous people and uneducated people make mistakes. I believe that collaborative custody clients won't make anywhere near the amount of mistakes. So again, that's why we built Apex, and that's why we built it with a collaborative custody mindset. I do believe that collaborative custody is how 80 or 90% of the world will hold their Bitcoin. The last 10%, will have a need for custodial services and potentially even, be, extremely tech savvy coders, super shadowy coders who do use self-custody, and they should if they can. But for 90%, collaborative custody is absolutely the way to go. And, Apex helps you do that. And so does Thea.
Fantastic. I love it. Yeah, one of the key distinctions between custodians and collaborative custody is that with custodians, it's extremely easy, but you need to place a great deal of trust in the person that you're engaging with, right? But with a platform like Thea,
Bitcoin.
Yeah, it does.
And that goes against what the point of Bitcoin is. That's just the fiat system 2.0, where banks lend out your money, 10 times over. Don't want that. So that's why it's so important to take custody, and collaborative custody just makes that 10 times easier.
100%. 100%. It's ultimately like the trade-off it boils down to is you can have easiness. The trade-off that it used to boil down to is that you could have an easy custody solution or you could have security. And now you can have both, right? With Thea's infrastructure and Apex's collaborative custody solution.
That's right as well. And there's a very well-known saying out there that goes, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So we created Apex. That's my response to what you just said. Again, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. But now we have Apex, which I feel balances those two things very carefully.
That's fantastic. I love it. It was, one of the founding ethos behind Thea was exactly that, eliminating that trade-off. And it's fantastic to have a firm like yours on board who's so forward-thinking and has the ability to really take this thing into the stratosphere in terms of acquiring new clientele. I want to ask you about the Asia Pacific region. I'm frankly not extremely familiar with the Asia Pacific region. I've never been to Australia or New Zealand. I've never been to an Asian country. Frankly, I've rarely ever traveled out of New England except for a couple of different Bitcoin and work conferences. And so you guys are positioning yourselves as a Bitcoin Vault platform with a focus on the Asia Pacific. It's what it says on your landing page. So what opportunities or challenges do you see in the Asia Pacific Bitcoin market? And how are you serving and expanding in that region?
A major reason we decided to focus specifically on the Asia Pacific region is because when I was conducting my research and, conjuring up the concept of Apex, back in 2022, 2025, there are some good collaborative custody solutions, say for America or say for Europe, or there's a good collaborative custody solution, but they specifically focus on the UAE and they don't allow clients from other regions. So that's a major reason why, because the Bitcoin landscape for custody and collaborative custody is still relatively new, it's still difficult to find solutions that work depending on what region you're in. So again, I couldn't open a collaborative custody vault with a major provider in the USA because they specifically focus on the USA. And then that left me with less options. So then I looked at one that's in the UK. Nope, they only take UK and USA clients again. So I was stuck. So, they say if, you can't find it, you should build it. So that's exactly what I did with Apex. And I realized that the Asia Pacific was one of the least served regions globally. And it's also one of the regions that has the highest concentration of Bitcoin owners. Singapore, which is one of our focus countries, has massive Bitcoin ownership. Hong Kong is the same, not quite as much as Singapore, but they do have a very high concentration of Bitcoin owners. Australia is the same. New Zealand's the same. I think New Zealand has a 35%, ownership rate. These are people, they're not holding a lot, but they're definitely warming to the space. And as the amounts grow and as the education becomes more widespread, there needs to be solutions in place for these people to hold their Bitcoin for the long term in a very safe way that makes it easy for them. And again, that's why we built Apex.
Beautiful. I love it. And Thea's infrastructure being global, it allows for you to do that in a really easy way. That's fantastic. So for listeners who are new to it, right? Ideally, a lot of people listening to this show, what Bitcoin is, what collaborative custody is, but many people might not be. Many people might be first-time listeners and, founders of other tech companies who may not be even thinking about this stuff. So for listeners who are new to it, what kind of problems are you encountering more often than not when people come to Bitcoin? Education is a huge part of what you do, right? Your program tackles these common myths and conceptions. So from your experience, what are some of the biggest misconceptions or questions that newcomers have about Bitcoin, and how do you address them?
Great question. And this is a very important thing to touch on as well. So first of all, a lot of people and newcomers think Bitcoin is some shady magic internet money thing that only coders and tech experts know about or can use. But that's not the case, right? If we break it down to first principles, Bitcoin is just money. It's just a form of money. It just so happens to be that it's the best form of money we've ever had in human history. That's it at the end of the day. And a little known fact is that every single fiat currency in history always fails. And the average age of a fiat currency is only 27 years. So, I think the facts are heavily in Bitcoin's favor. The rest of the world just hasn't realized that Bitcoin is humanity's final form of money yet. We went from salt and seashells through to then, precious metals, and coins. Then we went to gold, then we went to gold-backed banknotes. You could exchange those banknotes for the gold in the vault. Then in 1971, Nixon ended the gold standard, which meant that you couldn't exchange your fiat money for gold in the vault anymore. It was just backed by the trust in the issuing government. And ever since then, we've had massive inflation globally, and Bitcoin was created in 2009 to fix that problem, right? And inflation is only one of the problems. There's other problems like war. Fiat money enables war. Governments just print as much money as they want to go to war, and all that does is make things cost more for you. In a Bitcoin standard, that would not be possible because it would make war more ethical. If there was a serious danger to your country, the government would have no problems raising taxes from the citizens like you and me, Joe, to go to war if the country was properly, under threat. But in fiat, you get 6 people sitting around a room who make that decision without the rest of the population. However, that decision that those 6 people made affects everyone a lot more than they realize. You feel it with house prices going up. You feel it with, food prices going up. You feel it with things like time preference. The incentives are all messed up. So, fiat has major problems. And I think to actually understand Bitcoin properly, and to touch on that again, which was your question, to understand Bitcoin properly, you have to at least see some of the problems that fiat causes today. And that's one thing we offer here at Apex is we offer one-on-one education. And I say this to more people than I probably should. And they look at me like I'm crazy. I say, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And it's true. Yeah, but Bitcoin is just money at the end of the day. And it's just the best form of money we've ever had. And we teach this in our education session based on the principles of money and what makes money money. And Bitcoin is just the best money. It's the final form of money for humanity. And it's going to make the world, a lot better off.
100%. And in that same vein, we talk about Bitcoin being the last money, the final money. Your business is Bitcoin only. Thea is Bitcoin only. You talk about yourself as being a Bitcoin native platform. This is kind of self-explanatory for people who may be in our circles, but for folks who may be new, right? I mean, retail is just coming onto the scene in this bull market. Google search trends are still pretty low. But regardless, more people are going to be coming into the market this cycle, at this stage in the cycle, rather. So instead of offering a bunch of other stuff, right? Instead of offering a bunch of other crypto, why is it important for you to focus exclusively on Bitcoin? And how does that philosophy benefit your users?
We get asked this question a lot. Bitcoin is neutral money. Every single one of these other crypto coins out there, Ethereum, which I think Saifedean mentioned that it is the mother asshole of which all the shit coins spring from. I think he mentioned that on a Lex Friedman podcast. Absolutely fantastic podcast to watch. All these other coins, right? They have founding teams, they have marketing teams, they have companies, they regularly change their monetary policy. The Ethereum that exists in the system today is probably not what's going to exist tomorrow because Vitalik wants to expand the supply by 50%. He can do that. That is Fiat 2.0. That's exactly the problem that Bitcoin fixes, right? The monetary policy of Bitcoin is set in stone and it will never, ever change. And that's what makes Bitcoin valuable. Today, the Bitcoin you hold is going to be worth more tomorrow, right? You don't with these other coins and these other cryptos because, again, they just increase the supply on a whim because they feel like. So if you hold, Ethereum or if you hold Solana, you actually have, fiat risk and then Solana risk. So you're actually doubling up on your risk, right? You're not just holding fiat, which has a risk itself, but you're holding fiat and Solana. So you're basically just doubling your risk. But with Bitcoin, it totally takes all that away and removes the fiat system. Bitcoin is an entirely new system in itself. It's not the Ethereum, it's not the Solanas, which are still in the fiat system. People buy these coins to make more fiat. People don't buy Bitcoin to make more fiat. People buy Bitcoin to exit the system and own more Bitcoin. Because when fiat doesn't exist and Bitcoin is our store of value and our medium of exchange, all that matters is how much Bitcoin you have. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I love it. It's something that I never stop being excited to talk about. It's something I'm always excited to talk about because there are always new people in the space, right? And unfortunately, companies that are trying to wax people out of their money, it comes full circle. The exchanges we were talking about at the very beginning, they make the majority of their money by farming fees on stuff that isn't Bitcoin. And so it's in their best interest to conflate Bitcoin and everything else, what we call crypto. It belongs in quotation marks because it's vacuous. It's the total void. There's nothing there except for a casino. It's really important that that's at the center of your business. And I applaud you for that. And it's really good that you're educating people on that. So I want to ask you this because this is something that, I've experienced. I've been in the process, or I've been building businesses for quite some time in the Bitcoin space. It comes with very unique challenges relative to other businesses. This isn't the first thing you've done. It's not the first company you've built. So it comes with different challenges, right? You have perspective there. You guys pride yourself in being deliberate and not flashy. It says that on your website, and taking a long-term view rather than chasing any hype. So what major challenges have you faced in growing Apex, and how has this long-term approach helped you overcome them?
Question. So the biggest challenge we face at Apex is actually clients understanding Bitcoin properly. When Bitcoin shoots up, sometimes the clients decide to sell and take fiat. But that's not the game, right? The game is to actually stack as much Bitcoin as you can, because like I said earlier, every single fiat currency in history fails. So education is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we face, because educated clients don't make mistakes and educated clients stack more Bitcoin, which in the long run benefits them more. And that's what we want. We want a better world. How are my children, how are my grandchildren going to be able to afford anything, let alone a house, if inflation's 10% each year, which it is 10% each year, by the way. Productivity is just 5 or 6% each year, so it makes inflation feel like 4%. productivity offsets inflation. And again, this is something we teach in our education sessions. So, yeah, that's the biggest challenge we face is the education side of things. And it's why we've made that a major focus at Apex. Also, another challenge is it's not easy to run a Bitcoin company when only 2% or 3% of the world, understands Bitcoin. It definitely comes with its challenges. Again, the regulatory landscape, depending on where you're domiciled, there are various licenses you require. However, we've structured Apex in such a way, using Thea's infrastructure, and by partnering with Thea, we're just a software company. We just hold a backup key, and give you access to a dashboard where you can control your Bitcoin. Feature-rich dashboard, should I add. So, at the end of the day, we're not in control of our clients' money. So we're not a financial company. We're actually just a software company that so happens to hold a backup key, and we can't do anything more than that. You are fully in control of your own Bitcoin. So again, it's just the education side of things, and that's something we're really focusing on heavily at Apex. And there's going to be a lot more developments around that with webinars, with major partnerships in the space in the coming months. So stay tuned for that.
Beautiful. I love to hear it. And that's our aim with Thea. We wanted to make it as plug and play as possible, but as feature rich as possible. So everything you need as an advisor, but also everything that you need as a user is there. Like the whole, we can talk about the complexities of hardware wallets all day long, but hardware wallets are fantastic, right? But you're never going to give one to your grandma or even your mother and have them know what to do with it. Even if you take them through a crash course on what they're doing with, one of the more complicated hardware wallets, it's going to need to be hands-on more often than not, right? When that person's using it, it's just the reality, right? And if you go for a hardware device that is less secure, that's easier to use, rather, it's less secure. And so you have that trade-off, but with collaborative custody, you're eliminating that because you can use a more complicated hardware wallet, one that's more secure, but you always have Apex in your corner to help you out. And that's what I love. With this company, with Apex, what's your long-term vision? I know that you aim to become the leading Bitcoin custody, collaborative custody support provider in Asia Pacific. So where do you see Apex in the Bitcoin ecosystem in that region today? And where do you see it 5 to 10 years from now?
Obviously, Apex is still a very young company, though we still have a lot of features for being a young company. The future is extremely exciting in terms of where this is all going. Apex is positioning itself to become effectively what is the leading Bitcoin bank in the Asia Pacific region without actually being a bank. Because again, you hold your keys. So in Bitcoin, you are your own bank. Apex just allows you to do that in a safe and controlled way. So that's really our long-term goal, is to become the leading Bitcoin bank in Asia and have 10, 20, 30 million customers. And that's where this is heading. And we're growing fast, Joe. Just this morning, quite a few inquiries through with Bitcoin reaching, its all-time high. Though we don't want, the customers and our clients FOMOing, we want them to take an education-based approach, understand the asset itself. And for the long run, that makes everyone better off.
Beautiful. I love it. It does ultimately educating people before telling them to FOMO into Bitcoin and buy it is much better. We saw the pitfalls of not educating people in 2022 and 2023. People bought Bitcoin on Celsius and Voyager and FTX, and they all collapsed, and people lost money. So education, education, education. I love that that's
and
the
something
forefront.
Really important to make mention is that can't happen if you hold your Bitcoin on Apex or Thea. It just can't happen because you're holding your keys. So you're in control. We just have some training wheels to actually help you if things get tough. And we also provide the education. So it's basically like full self-custody, right? But just with some training wheels. And it's just as safe, just as secure, but you get all these extra features and extra services like education, support, inheritance, that come with it, that I think is really important for, 80% of the world, because you can't hold your Bitcoin in a self-custody wallet. And if something happens to you, expect the rest of your family to be able to figure it all out on their own. It's just not going to happen. Yeah, the smart users are signing up with Apex, are getting their inheritance in place, and are growing their stack continually.
Couldn't agree more. I love to hear it. So 2 final things. First thing, I want to ask you, for founders, right? For founders that might be listening, whether they're seasoned founders or first-time founders or people who are thinking of starting a company, what would be your one piece of advice to them, whether it's in the Bitcoin space or elsewhere?
One piece of advice would be to bite off more than you can chew, and chew like hell.
Beautiful. I love to hear it. And I tend to agree with you there, right? People they underestimate their abilities. They live in fear, right? If you live in fear, you're never going to figure out what is in store for you in the rest of your life, right? Never underestimate yourself. Never be a pessimist. Never doom, right? These things are a surefire method to just want to sit in bed all day and do nothing with your life, right? I love it. Bite off more than you can chew and chew like hell. That's
Just chew like
fantastic.
hell, and everything will work out in the long run. And you'll look back and be bloody glad that you took that approach. And that's the exact approach we take at Apex. We bite off more than we can chew, and we chew like hell. And that's why we're one of the leading collaborative custody companies in the space.
There you go. I love to hear it. And it's even if people fall short, if it's their first company that they're founding, you'll have so many learnings from it. I mean, I've said this before. I had started a company, I think 2 years ago. It was outside of the Bitcoin space. It ended up not doing what I thought it would do, at least, over, X period that I basically had given myself to get this thing off the ground. It was profitable, but not what I wanted it to be. And so ultimately you could look back on those things and be upset about it, but ultimately those are more valuable than your wins, right? Because during your wins, people tend to,
Yeah, and I say to people often, you're not starting from zero, you're starting from experience. And it's experience that makes things work in the long run. So just keep trying. And I think there's a very famous story about the KFC founder. I think, the KFC was his 60th company or something that, none of them worked, and KFC worked. And look at where KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken is today. So I'd like to finish off by saying something, and it's a quote that really resonates with me being in the Bitcoin space. And it's, there is no red, there is no blue. There is the money printer, and there is you. And it's really important to recognize that there is no right or wrong way, or no right or wrong way in terms of what money you decide to hold, whether you want to hold gold, whether you want to hold, the Kenyan shilling, whether you want to hold, the South African rand, whether you want to hold the Philippine peso. You can hold whatever you want. But I do just want to say that there are consequences to what you hold, and consequences cannot be avoided unless you learn about the monetary system and you learn, what makes assets like Bitcoin different compared to those fiat currencies. So yeah, that's something that's extremely important at Apex, and that we also educate our customers on, that there are consequences, right? And you may be, a bondholder, right? Holding yieldless, bonds. They are yieldless in real terms as well. When we talk about the rate of inflation, they're actually negative a lot of the time. And we explain this to our customers, and it really, really opens their eyes that, these days. And we're now at the stage where it's actually massively risky to not own any Bitcoin. I mean, zoom out and look at the chart from 2009 to today. It's just going like this, right? It's actually extremely consistent. And people say to me, but Bitcoin's volatile. And I go, yes, it's volatile, but that's normal. Bitcoin is 16 years old, and it's taking on the largest total addressable market in the entire world, money. Right? There is no bigger market than money in the world, because money is 50% of everything, right? Money is 50% of a house. Money is 50% of this mouse hair when I bought it. Money is 50% of, all your stocks, right? Money is 50% of everything. It's bigger than the total oil market globally. It's bigger than the real estate market globally. Money is, again, 50% of everything. Bitcoin's only 16 years old, and it's taking on the world's largest total addressable market. So, I mean, it's going to be volatile, right? It's in its price discovery phase. It's growing, and it's growing fast. And we're at about a 3 or 4% global adoption right now. But next year, that could very easily be 20%. And I just want to finish by saying, right now, you're not late, but very soon you will be late. And don't regret missing out on Bitcoin twice, because we all regret missing out on it the first time. Don't be the person who regrets learning about Bitcoin and getting it right the second time around.
You'll love to hear it. Ultimately, everybody gets into Bitcoin at some stage. You're never too late. You'll get in at the price, and the price that you deserve is going to be determined by you. Caleb, thanks so much for coming on. Oh, go ahead.
That's right. Everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. Great saying, Joe.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Caleb, for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. Of course, before we sign off, where can people find more about you, and where can people check out Apex?
Great. Apex-bitcoin.com. Come and check out our website, learn a little bit. We have some great resources on our website. And if you just want to dip your toes in, there's a free investors presentation that we have on our website. You can also book a free one-on-one education session on our website. That's not going to be available for long, so do get in quick, and we are booking up spaces very fast. We actually charge $600 for that extremely extensive education session, but for a limited time, we're offering it for free. So make sure you take that opportunity up. It may just light the spark that changes everything. And you'll look back in 20 years as that being a pivotal moment. So don't let that opportunity pass by you. Apex-bitcoin.com. And yes, come check us out and see what all the fuss is about. And, if you're really feeling it, sign up as well and set up a vault with Apex using FAIR's and infrastructure.
Fantastic. Caleb, once again, thanks so much for coming on, and thank you for watching this latest episode of Over the Horizon. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to learn more, and of course, repost this so more people see it. Liking the video also helps quite a lot. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.